SANDAG EMB working group meeting. Happy New Year to everybody. Looking forward to a new year of quarterly meetings. We'll see if they're all virtual or some might be able to be in person this year. Before we jump to the meeting, I'll ask our working group leader, Kim, to confirm that we have a quorum. I think you said yes. Okay.
Okay, I thought I was unmuted, but yes, we do.
Okay, so I'd like to update the members and public on our new process for both member and public comments. The primary members will be using their cameras, and we will take live public comments. Members are asked to turn on their cameras when they have a comment or question, and then we can recognize you. I'm going to ask Kim Smith to go over the basic instructions for both working group members and members of the public to participate in the meeting. Take it away.
Okay, I think you kind of covered it, but so the public may provide live comments during today's EMP working group meeting. In order to provide live comments, when public comments are called for on an item, click on the raised hand icon in the Zoom control panel, which is on the top right of your screen. You will be called on by the name you registered with, and you can provide comments then. There's no need to mute your microphone. The organizers will unmute you when you're called on. The instructions for providing any live comments are also on the bottom of the cover page of today's meeting agenda, which can be accessed from the homepage of SANDAG's website at www.sandag.org. All comments, whether emailed or live, will be made a part of today's meeting record. So Leanne, back to you.
Okay, great. So let's get started with item number 2, approval of the September 14th, 2021 meeting minutes. You guys had a chance to look.
This is Trish, and I have a correction.
Okay.
Cheryl Goddard's name is misspelled throughout the meeting minutes.
We will correct that.
Good. Any other changes? Do I have a motion? Michael? To approve, I assume. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, do we have any public comments?
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay. And I think we already had our member comments. Kim, can you go ahead and begin the roll call, please, for the vote?
Yep. Give me 1 minute here. Okay. So Leanne Carmichael, County of San Diego.
Yes.
Kristen Forberger, City of San Diego.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. Do we have Chris Jacobs from the City of Santee on? I don't think so. I was told that Melanie retired, so we have a new member from the City of Santee.
She retired the end of December, and Chris is now the director.
Great.
Or acting.
Yeah, I don't think he's on today. Roseanne Humphreys, City of Carlsbad.
Yes.
Stephanie Cervantes, City of Oceanside.
Yes.
Cheryl Goddard, City of Chula Vista. I don't think Cheryl's on. Let's see. Stefan Galvez from Caltrans.
Aye, yes.
Dave Mayer, CDFW.
I wasn't present, so maybe Hans can approve. Is that possible?
You can still vote, Dave.
Maybe Dave.
Yeah.
Then I'll approve it. Don't get me in trouble.
Okay, Fish and Wildlife Service. I don't see Susan, but Dave.
Okay, even though I wasn't there either.
Okay, is anyone on from Forest Service? I don't think so. Robert Fisher, USGS.
Approved.
Let's see, Michael Beck,
Yes.
Ann Harvey,
I wasn't there, but I approve, I guess.
Trish Smith,
Yes,
and Candace Woe,
Yes.
and Jim Whalen.
Yes.
I don't think Matt Adams is on.
No.
Can I call you back up, MP?
We are approved.
Painfully slowly.
Yes.
Okay, so item number 3 is the public comments, communications, or member comments. So I'll start with members of the public who wish to offer public comment not related to a matter on today's agenda. Please raise your hand so that we can call you.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Leanne. I just wanted to kind of go back because I saw in the chat that Cheryl was actually here and she did vote to approve the minutes as well.
Oh, thank you, Courtney.
I don't see anyone with their hand up, Dan.
Okay. Next, is there anything from the members that they'd like to share?
I'd like to interrupt again as well. I do actually have an update to share with the EMP working group today.
Yes. Courtney.
So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Courtney Pesh and I'm a regional planner 2 here at Sandag. I wanted to provide you all a few updates about the EMP Land Management Grants 10th cycle of call for projects. So as many of you know, the 10th cycle was approved and released by the Sandag Board of Directors on October 25th this past year. This particular cycle will be utilizing a new software program called BidNet Direct. So in order to apply, we asked individuals that they need to be registered with BidNet in order to apply. And if any of you haven't received any of this information, please reach out to me at the end of the working group and I can send you along all that information on how to register and how to use BidNet. In addition, I would also like to highlight the SDMMP is a resource to all potential applicants, and so that our close date for the application will be January 31st. So we highly suggest to please reach out to Dr. Christine Preston or Sarah McCutcheon with any potential questions or project proposal ideas. Lastly, I would like to say that all questions are due in BidNet by January 17th and that all applications will be due January 31st. Finally, which leads me to my next reminder, since the EMP working group called for the evaluation committee back in 2020, I think it's appropriate to remind you all who volunteered to be on the committee. So those who had volunteered were Susan Wynn, David Mayer, Robert Fisher, Leanne Carmichael, Trish Smith, Michael Beck, Candace Wu, and James Whalen. The evaluation committee will meet sometime in March to review and score all applications. Those are all my comments, and thank you all who have volunteered for the evaluation committee. And I'll be reaching out soon with potential meeting dates. Thank you.
Courtney, did you say the deadline to register is the 17th?
To submit any questions about the application process or any of the details within the call.
Okay.
Courtney, are we going to try to have a recommendation for the March meeting then?
At the May.
At the May. Okay.
We'll be meeting sometime in March. Want to give enough time for everybody to be able to review and score, and then for us all to meet.
Okay. Anybody else from the group? Robert.
Yeah, we had a couple of papers that just came out that would be of interest, and so I'll put links to them in the chat box so that people can download them. I think that's maybe easier than trying to send PDFs around. One of them was on Western Spadefoot, and if folks remember, Hermes Copper, they just made a decision for listing in the last month, and Western Spadefoot, they're going to be making a decision on in the near future. We're continuing to work on that species. This is a distribution model for that species for Southern California, and we're trying to fill some data for the service, the decision process, even though that's pending, on how many more patches we can find that might be occupied by by spade foots. So I'll drop that paper in. We had another paper that just came out on pond turtles. The decision for pond turtles is 2023. And so we're trying to get as much information to the service before 2023 to help inform the decision on the pond turtles. We've got one other paper is a spadefoot paper on upland movement. I don't think I sent that around. Dave, I think I sent it to Dave Mayer recently, and it looks at how far from vernal pools spadefoot's, and that was a lag grant we got with the department. And then there's pending our Golden Eagle occupancy study should be out any day. And so I can send that to Courtney when it comes out. And that's the nest site occupancy for Orange, Western Riverside, and San Diego counties. And we give an estimate of the numbers of pairs and their success rate 2016, 2017. And so that's going to be a part of the monitoring program we kind of developed for Golden Eagles going forward, tied with the movement data for the Eagles, having also an estimate of the number of territories in Southern California to set as goals. So that one should be out any day, but I don't have a live link to that yet. So anyway, I'll drop these in the chat, and if people want to talk to me later, they can about any things.
Great. Thanks, Robert. Michael, you had your hand up first.
That's an incredibly long list of productivity, Robert. Congratulations on getting all that stuff together. Very relevant. So you were previously concerned about the implications of spadefoot listing with respect to restoration projects, this kind of broader world that we work in that might have kind of interface with spadefoots. What do you know what the process is going to be?
Well, I can let Dave speak to that probably, but if they get listed, they're not a covered species, then they have to be treated as endangered species under any plan area, I would think. The same way the hermit would be if it's not a covered species. So I would say any impacts that would potentially, like restoration on vernal pools that might break the ground or have an impact on habitat would probably have to be considered through that process. I have no idea what the decision is going to be on the southern one or the northern one, but we're trying to get as much information to show the success of a lot of these planning efforts and to just daylight as much as we can, what's been going on and those responses to help inform that decision. But Dave could probably speak to what that'll mean at the federal level. Or not.
Okay.
Dave, you're on mute if you were going to say anything. But that would be my understanding, Michael, and it's not a covered species in the MSCP as far as I'm aware.
It's not, no.
Okay. David Mayer.
Hi, a couple things. Just wanted to say it is a covered species in central coastal Orange County, but not in the MSCP. Couple of exciting announcements. First off, we had a call with WCB last week, and the gist is in the next 6 months and fiscal year coming forward, there is a lot of money in the California General Fund that's going to be going to them for all sorts of projects. So the buckets are pretty full, whether it's a climate resiliency or just an outright acquisition, restoration, especially riparian, basically anything that's going to help conserve water or or keep water in some of the rivers, wildlife corridors. And by a lot of money, I mean, I think right now they've got like 27 million or something like for corridors, but they're going to be getting another 200 and some million. So there's a lot of money coming this way, and we need to start thinking strategically and thinking big. The second thing is that there was new legislation that went into effect. I think it was SB 155. I apologize if I'm wrong on my numbers. There's been a lot of stuff going on lately. And essentially it is a CEQA, it's an opportunity for a CEQA exemption to a lead agency that is doing a restoration project. So it's got to be restoration. It can't be like for some other purpose. and you get some restoration out of it. It's got to be primarily restoration, though there may be some ancillary benefits, such as maybe there's a trail involved or some other aspect of this beneficial. This largely went through the legislature without CDFW getting comment. So we're struggling a little bit still with a little bit of conflict between Fish and Game Code and what the legislation says, and trying to come up with guidance. One thing I can tell you at this point, though, is that CDFW can't use it if we were in a situation where we were expected to be the secret lead agency. We can't, we don't want it to be seen as self-serving. So, you know, City of San Diego or some other entity could be the lead. They have to, basically, you want to be organized, have the meetings ahead of time, and ultimately the director of Fish and Wildlife has to sign off on it. But it's been used once so far. We've got another one in the queue that we think will apply up in Newport, and we'll see where it goes from there. But there's a lot of learning yet to be had and some guidance forthcoming. They did just supposedly start a website. I haven't seen it yet, but if anybody has questions on that, please reach out and I'll try and get some guidance for myself and to you. I think that's all.
Can I ask a question of Dave? This is Trish.
Sure, Trish.
I've heard a rumor that WCB is going to prioritize Southern California for some of their funding bins. Is that, have you heard anything to that level?
So that goes back, gosh, a couple of years. And that had been primarily related to repairing and restoration projects, because it had been recognized coastal Southern California really had not gotten a fair share out of the state budget in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
And again, they like big projects. They like a lot of partners. You know, people with skin in the game. Doesn't necessarily mean they're providing funding, but maybe they're providing some other support. So like a big watershed would be a great proposal.
Okay.
I did have one other piece of information less positive, and that is there will not be a local assistance grant program this year. It'll start up again in 2023. It's just related to the budget cycle and billing cycles and funding authority, spending authority.
Okay.
That's great news.
Anything else from any members? I don't see any hands up. Kim, are there any public comments to be read in?
No.
Okay, so we'll move on to item number 4. Keith is going to give us an update and next steps for the regional habitat conservation vision since the adoption of the 2021 regional plan. You ready, Keith?
Yeah. Hi,
It'll
everyone.
be interesting.
Happy 2022. Courtney's going to be driving the PowerPoint here, and I'll be talking about it. So first of all, I hope we can do these meetings in person in the near future. All of our San Diego offices right now are getting updated to become hybrid, because we've noticed that during the pandemic, we get a lot of participation by the public who doesn't want to necessarily drive down to our offices. So I envision in the future, we'll have these meetings in a hybrid type of format, where if you want to come on onto a virtual meeting, you can do that. If you want to come in person, you can also do that. But right now, we're having all of our meetings remote because of the current surge in the pandemic for the COVID. But for today, I'd like to kind of chart out the next 6 months for you and let you know you're going to be very busy. So kind of give you a head start on what we're seeing coming in the next 6 months in terms of workload. And before I do that, though, I kind of want to share something with you that I found really exciting. So next slide, Courtney. So we have a huge restoration project, which I think most of you are aware of, the San Alejo Lagoon restoration. It's a $117 million project. And it's going to be finishing up this quarter. So we're really excited about it. It looks really good out there. Doug Gibson, who's been we've been working with hand in glove the entire time, has been doing the monitoring. And recently he was quoted by a newspaper, and I had to follow up with him. So the recent opening of the lagoon to the tides has created a whole bunch of new saltwater species that he's not seen there before. He's really excited. I'm really excited about it. They had their first 2-spotted octopus in the lagoon ever. There's actually scallops now on the bottom of the lagoon, and they have got needlefish that they've never seen before. So it's a really kind of a positive sign. These large-scale restoration projects are working. I love
Wow.
seeing these where species move back in, restoration is showing successful. So I'm really excited about it. So we're wrapping up San Diego, at least for the construction part of it. And then we'll be moving on to San Diego. We call San Diego Phase 2, or it's got the moniker W19, if that means anything to anybody. That's an $87 million effort that will restore about 84 acres. So that's the exciting part. Let me go back to business now. I'll be letting you know today about the Transnet Environmental Mitigation Program, kind of the status, where we're at, what the funding looks like in the future. Talk about the habitat vision that's been incorporated in our 21 regional plan and where we're going to go with that. And finally, talk about working groups and some of the larger discussions on working groups and how we implement that plan. So according to the next slide. So we've talked about these in the past about the status of the EMP, but I kind of like high level summary from 2008 until 2021. You know, we've acquired about 8,700 acres of property. That's a huge amount of property that was acquired on the EMP program. We funded 2 major lagoon restoration efforts, San Alejo, which just finishing up, and San Diego, which will just be starting. We were able to fund $20 million of non-mitigation acquisitions. Those are the, remember, we had a land acquisition grant cycle a little while ago. We've helped acquire property that way. Courtney has helped manage the 117 land management grants costing $16.5 million. And that's the only grant program I know that actually goes towards land management. So I'm really happy that we have established that. And finally, you know, with your efforts, you know, we've been able to provide $35 million towards the creation of the San Diego Management and Monitoring Program and provide regional monitoring. So all these are really positive efforts, and I'm really excited about it. So let's talk about where Transnet's going and where the EMP is going. Next slide. So if you recall, Transnet's that half-cent sales tax that was adopted by the voters in 2004 and went into effect in 2008 for a 40-year time frame. So it goes from 2008 to 2048. And what it says in there is that a portion of the dollars that are collected by tax revenue in the region, that half-cent sales tax, and a portion of that half-cent sales tax goes towards various programs. For your purposes, for the environmental mitigation program, there's a total of 6.2% of the total Transnet revenues goes into that environmental mitigation program. So it's really cool in terms of there's already money being from the tax revenues being collected, and it can only be used for environmental mitigation. We call it a lockbox program. Therefore, it can't be redirected by the board. It requires a vote of the people to change any of that provisions. At the time of 2002, when this whole kind of financial strategy was being developed, it was estimated about $850 million in 2002 dollars was going to be generated from this proposal. So where are we? Next slide, Courtney. So on December 3rd of last year, 2021, our chief economist presented information to the Sandag Board of Directors on the status of Transnet. And remember, since EMP is part of Transnet, any effect on the larger Transnet program trickles directly proportionate to the EMP program. And I encourage you all to listen to that tape and see what our chief economist had to say about the various programs and the reasons why. The 2 things I want to pass along to you today are that Transnet revenues are 40% lower than the projected revenues. So that $850 million, it's 40% lower than that. There's 2 reasons. We've talked about this in the past. One was the 2008 recession. So the Transnet forecasts didn't assume there'd be a big recession, worldwide recession, and there was. So that dropped down in 2008. The other thing is that the new Department of Finance forecasts for population projections in the region are about 800,000 people less. And why does that matter? Less people means less buying, less sales tax. Therefore, combining those 2 efforts, you now see a 40% reduction in the overall Transnet and 40% reduction in the EMP funding. So Kim has less revenue to work with to accomplish the goals that we have. So next slide. So the original funding estimate in 2002 dollars was $850 million. Our revised funding estimates put back in 2002 dollars are about $518 million. Our current budget, we have about $48 million remaining, and that's actual dollars. There'll be some future dollars as well, but that's what we have currently in our budget. So what we're seeing here is that we will be doing less big projects in the future. There's no money for it. San Diego, which started up beginning of this year, will be our last major effort for restoration or acquisition in the region under the EMP. We will continue to provide the funding, $4 million for management and monitoring up until the 2028, which is kind of encapsulated in our current MOU. And after that, we need to figure out funding for regional management and monitoring. And we'll continue on discussions with endowments. From 2028 to 2035, we have to go through a series of repayments of loans that we borrowed money early so we could actually do all this great work. We've borrowed about $152 million, which is good because it allowed us to do more things earlier, but now I have to pay that back. After 2035, there will be some additional funds in the future. We're not sure how much, but that'll be a discussion of how that gets rolled over and determined in the future. The upshot of this is that we cannot rely upon Transnet EMP funding to continue to fill in the funding gaps of regional funding. So we need to figure out a new source of regional funding. So what opportunities are there? Next slide. So on December 10th, the Senate Board of Directors adopted the 21 Regional Plan, which is a 30-year vision of transportation and sustainable land use for the region. So there's a component of transportation networks, which I think you're familiar with, and there's a component of land use, which we call a sustainable community strategy. Incorporated in that sustainable community strategy is something known as the Regional Habitat Conservation Vision. Many of you worked on this vision, so I thank you in advance for that. The idea was we needed to identify and protect, connect, and respect the open space and the habitats that we have in the region. So why was this so important to be included in the regional plan? So the regional plan identifies a $3 billion funding investment for regional habitat conservation. And what it does is it puts that commitment for habitat conservation vision at the same as any other infrastructure in the regional plan, whether it's transportation improvements, EVs, climate, broadband, it's all at the same level in terms of being able to go out and fund it. So now SANDAG moves towards implementation. So again, it's a plan, it's not a promise. So we're gonna have to work collectively together to figure out how we define and meet these regional funding needs out there. So what's happening in the region? So right now there is something you probably have heard about, Citizens Initiative. That Citizens Initiative is looking at how to fund these infrastructure improvements, and they're shooting for the November ballot. SANDAG legally cannot be involved in that, but I know many in the room probably are involved, and I encourage you guys to get together outside of SANDAG and talk about that. Get involved. But for today, maybe we can provide some information sharing for any of the websites that are talking about the Citizens Initiative. You can definitely post those in the chat and we can have Courtney send those out. Our Office of General Counsel, that's the SANDAG's general legal staff, is having a conversation about what role SANDAG actually can play. Right now, we're advised that we can't even talk about it in open forums. Therefore, for the purposes of today, I'm passing along information to you, hoping to encourage you, you guys will address this outside of the SANDAG forums, but I think it's very important. So what SANDAG will be doing over the next 6 months, and how does it involve you? Next slide. So back in 2010, in 2010, the EMP working group crafted over a period of about 6 to 9 months, a set of recommendations on how much land needed to be acquired, what kind of management costs were associated with those lands, the biological monitoring that was necessary, and a contingency fund. We also looked at an endowment and what necessarily create an endowment for future regional funding. So we identified a $3 billion regional funding need. And we, as an EMP working group, you would approve that, adopt it, and it moved forward to the SANDAG Board of Directors. Next slide. SANDAG Board of Directors took that information and developed what was known as the 2016 Measure A Quality of Life. So they updated the information sent by the EMP. They dropped the endowment due to legal reasons on use of sales tax, and they increased the cost from $2010 to 2016. And what you saw in the measure was a percentage of about $2 billion estimated, or 11% of the quality of life funding at 18 billion would have gone towards open space if that would have passed. The measure did not reach the 2/3 voter approval threshold, so it did not pass. But what I want you to know in this slide is that 58% voted yes on the measure, and that would have been more than enough to for the majority, which was only required for the Citizens Initiative. So even with divided Sandag board and opposition, that measure garnered 58%. And that's a good sign going forward. So what needs to happen now? Well, we need to update the funding needs from the 2010 effort. Acquisitions, we need to figure out what lands have been acquired and deduct that. And if there's any new information from the county's efforts on what land needs to be included. We also need to increase the cost per acre to current values. Management, I know we have a lot more information on management these days, and we need to update that cost per acre on land management cost. And monitoring, we need to have new information from SDMMP. Let's figure out what the actual cost per acre of monitoring should be. We need to encourage that we get all this information, get an approval from the EMP working group by the spring. So I'm thinking by May, I'd like to see something back to the Sandag that has the approval of the EMP working group on these revised costs. And all of you will be important for this effort. I can envision specific meetings on acquisition, management costs, maybe future monitoring efforts, specific topical meetings which you can help generate this information. Ken Smith is the lead on this effort, and we're proposing a strategy after I finish my presentation on how to proceed. I want this to be as inclusive and open as possible. I want it to be transparent. And even though a member not be on the EMP working group, I'd like to have them be involved as much as possible. I think that's going to be left up to Kim to figure out how we create that inclusive environment where all voices are heard as part of this. Finally, I just turn over to the working groups for a second. Next slide, Courtney. So the working groups, as part of this, we'll be looking ahead in terms of what the Sandag board and policy advisory committees will need to implement the new regional plan. And I think you're well familiar with what working groups do. They help advise PACs on policies and projects. They have information sharing. They provide points of collaboration and cooperation. But the working groups have a lot of problems as well. Next slide. So we have about 24 working groups at Sandag. There's too many of them. They meet too often. Sometimes if they lack quorum on many of them, they don't get enough engagement. They lack meaningful agenda items. Some meet just to meet, which is not a bad thing. It's just not the purpose of a working group. So there's many other issues, including drain on staff time, lack of flexibility, and situations where if you don't have a quorum, you can't even meet under the Brown Act. So we're proposing to align to the current needs and to update charters. So what I would say to you is we envision two things occur immediately. One is we'll have a mobility working group and a sustainable communities working group, which will be created in this next year. We also take the opportunity to engage our executive committee to see if we can go forward and clean up some of the existing working groups, the nomenclature, the review of the memberships, updated charters, and moving forward with a new streamlined version of working groups themselves. So what does this look like, I think, to you? Next slide, Courtney. Sustainable Community Working Group would be the working group for the Regional Planning Committee. And underneath that would be a bunch of technical advisory committees. So if we're desired, these would be non-Brown Act, non-Form 700 standing committees. So our desire right now is maybe you would become the Environmental Mitigation Program Technical Advisory Committee. Or maybe you want it broader than that. Maybe your name should be the Regional Habitat Conservation Technical Advisory Committee. That's all up for discussion, and there's been no decision on that made. But the goal is to hopefully have a non-Brown Act, more flexibility. So if you do have a lack of quorum, you can still continue to meet and provide recommendations to Sandag staff. Let me see what else I want to say about this. You could still have voting if you want to. You can still elect your own chair as you want to, but you wouldn't be dedicated. You wouldn't be imposed upon a chair by a PAC. Maybe we would tweak our charters, update the current needs, and possibly go to the executive committee and come back if there's support to this with recommendations to this group. So I think it's a positive step. I think it's much needed cleanup for a lot of working groups. And for you, I don't think you'll see a lot of changes. Maybe you'll have a name change and everything else feel and look the same, but there's a lot of behind the scene things that will be different and easier. So I know I just dropped a ton of information on you in a very short amount of time. We're gonna be keeping you very busy this year, but let me see if I can address in terms of questions. I'll turn it over to the chair and for any questions to be answered.
Leanne, you want to take members or public first?
Well, I see some members' hands up. So let's go ahead and take members first. Michael?
Thanks, Keith. That all sounds very rational and needed. So that sounds like good good revisions. So are the list of the funding categories that are going to be under review for habitat funding, is that going to be the same list that we used last time around, or is that going to be revised in any way, just the categories?
I think that's up to the working group and the subcommittees, anybody who, and Kim's grouping that she's working on. I've always kind of envisioned there was an acquisition component, a management component, a monitoring component. But if you see more, feel free. Get into each of those you want to.
And so what's the difference between our EMP working group work and the technical committees?
The technical, you mean the technical advisory committee, that structure? It's just a name. Basically, it's a name only. The upshot of those is we can make it non-Brown Act, non-Form 700. It makes it a ton easier on everybody. Just like you had the minutes, we had to go painfully through every minutes, that would go away. And all Kim would do is say, anybody want to change the minutes? You make changes and you move on.
So the technical committee on environmental issues, is that the same? Is that the EMP working group?
No, I think maybe I went over that too quick. There's a sustainable community strategy working group.
Right.
And that deals with stuff like housing. It deals with anything related in their sustainable communities. A component of the environment. So what we've envisioned is there would be a representative on that working group that could come from the EMP. That's fine. But then there's a whole bunch of technical sausage making that we make behind the scenes, what you go through every day. And that would be a technical advisory committee type of work.
Okay, I get it. And then when and how are those committees, the technical committees, going to be set up?
We're still in just discussions with our executive committee for the board. So first we have to say this makes sense, go forward. And if we go forward with that, then we come back to the working groups and we say, here's what we envision for changes.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
So this group would no longer, it would be a committee and we wouldn't have the structure we have now. And we wouldn't be, we wouldn't follow the Brown Act.
That's what we're hoping. We have some legal issues we have to resolve with that. It may go down in flames because of the laws, but that's our desire.
And
And
the
we would
technical
still be
committee then is a
making-
subset of the EMP working group potentially, or you can be on both?
EMP working group would morph into the technical advisory committee. For lack of a better word, you wouldn't see any difference. You'd have a name change.
Okay.
You'd still have membership, you'd still have a charter, you'd still do your minutes, but you'd have more flexibility.
I got you.
And we would still be the ones making the recommendations on the grants and whatnot.
Yep, anything related to EMP would definitely come through this technical advisory committee. And then if you broaden out your scope, which I think you probably should think about, anything related to regional habitat conservation or that kind of would also do that.
And Sandag staff would still staff the committee though?
Yes, the committee itself would be staffed by, in this case, Kim Smith. And so she would be, like I said, you wouldn't see a lot of changes for your part. Kim still would be your point of contact. You'd still run your meetings, your recommendations go through Kim to the policy advisory committees and the board.
Leanne, you likely wouldn't have to run these meetings. That's the change you would see.
Well, that's up to you guys. If you want to have your own elected chair, you'd be able to elect your own chair. There's flexibility is what we're trying to say.
I like having Leanne chair the meetings and Kim do all the groundwork. That's my 2 cents anyway.
Sounds good to
Thank you,
me.
Michael. David?
Yeah, something we've talked about before. Would fire planning, regional fire planning issues, would that stay with the EMP or whatever it becomes, or is that now a climate resiliency topic or a
Oh,
combination?
David, we haven't even talked about that at Sandag yet. I can envision there be some overlap between that, but I think you're about 6 months to 9 months ahead of anybody on that issue. Hasn't even been discussed.
Any
Other
other
questions?
comments from members? Jim, did you raise your hand? No?
Well, I'm gonna turn it over to Kim then. She's gonna recommend a strategy to go forward to kind of create that structure to get information on the regional needs and updated costs. Kim?
Leanne, did you want to reach out for public comments
Oh,
first?
sorry.
That's good.
Yeah.
I didn't see any hands up, but
Do we have any public comments? If so, raise your hand, please. I also don't see any.
I don't see any.
Okay, so Kim, go ahead and move on.
Yeah, so as Keith was describing, we have been working, Courtney, myself, and Lauren have been working on filling those gaps on kind of where we are with acquisitions, what we have as far as cost per acre. And we're gathering that initial information now and are likely going to be reaching out to individuals at the different jurisdictions, the Fish and Wildlife Service, California Department of Fish and Wildlife for information. But we'd like to create some sort of, as we said, subcommittee ad hoc group, and it doesn't have to be just the members of the EMP working group. So we'd like to, my thought was to start off and call for an ad hoc group. And then for those members that are not in the EMP working group or that are here today, members of the public, if you are interested in also, sitting on this ad hoc group, then please email myself or Courtney, and we will also include you in on our first meeting. And we anticipate our first meeting to be sometime in February. So if I can ask Leanne to ask those who are interested in the EMP working group to raise their hands, and we'll get everybody's name. And then those members of the public or the attendees today, if you're interested, please send either Courtney or myself an email, and we will include you also.
Okay, so if anyone would like to be on this ad hoc committee to discuss, and you're going to discuss like the structure and how you would recommend moving forward.
So this committee is going to be specifically for our regional needs,
right,
in order to determine those estimates by the May working group.
Okay, so I see Trish Smith and Dave Mayer.
I almost should have said who doesn't want to do it. Let's see. Oh,
Susan Wynn, Michael Beck, Deb Mosley.
So your only constraint there, Kim, is if you have 10 EMP working group members, then you have to have Brown Act, you have to make a, the whole official thing. So less than 10.
Okay. I think I have less than 10. Deb.
We have Stephanie.
Yep. Stephanie, Deb, Michael, Dave, Susan, and Trish. Okay.
Kim.
Yep.
Since this is regional, I think Dan Silver might be very interested in participating, but can you send me a quick summary of what this ad hoc committee's scope is, et cetera?
Yeah, I'll send that out to the entire working group.
Okay, thanks.
If members of the public who are on right now that do want to volunteer, if you could put your email addresses in the chat, then we can capture those as well.
I don't see any hands up at the moment, but
I see one.
No, now we do.
David Grubb, yeah.
David Grubb, yeah.
Okay, I think I've got everybody.
And I think if anybody wants to join, to just let you know in the next little while, right?
Yeah, or send me an email after the meeting.
Okay.
The next meeting won't occur till sometime in February, so.
Okay. Well, thank you, Keith and Kim. Now we'll move on to item number 5, Dr. Megan Jennings. Thank you for coming today. Megan is from SDSU, and she'll provide an update on research efforts and products as a result of the IERMM and Climate Science Alliance collaboration on the Climate Adaptation and Conservation Research Program. Megan?
Thanks, Leanne. And thanks to Kim and Courtney for coordinating this. We were talking about some issues we were working on together, and Kim said, I feel like you have a lot going on. Can you come talk about what you've been doing? And in fact, the last time I was here to talk to you all about things was in March 2020, the last time I actually think this group met in person. So I'm excited to share with you all the things that we've been doing over the last almost 2 years now, mostly focused on climate adaptation, but I'll tell you a little bit more. So let me get my screen sharing here. There we go. Can you see my presented slide? Great. So the Institute for Ecological Monitoring and Management at San Diego State University, as some of you know, Becca Lewison and Doug Deutschman, my colleagues at San Diego State, started IEMM, I think maybe just about a little over 10 years ago. And, we have been working on providing science and service. SDSU has a long history of providing science and service on regional conservation issues. And they formalized that with the development of IEMM. And over the last few years, we've been working not only on these conservation issues, but really focusing on adding climate adaptation into the mix there. So that's what I'm going to talk a bit about today. As I mentioned, it started all with providing science and service of all this conservation work that's been going on in the county, in the region for over 20 years. Faculty have been involved in that, in this applied conservation work. Again, providing science and service of making these planning decisions, monitoring decisions, management decisions. And our recent projects, I think, have really expanded that science through diverse partnerships with a range of stakeholders and end user groups. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So the last time I was here, I was talking about our climate resilient connectivity project. So I thought I'd pick up where I left off and sort of remind everyone where we left off, and sort of take you from there, because the cool thing about all this work that we've been doing at SDSU in collaboration with the Climate Science Alliance is I feel like all the threads connect. We start with one thing and then it evolves, and we just sort of snowball from one thing to another. And I think that's the cool thing about it, is that it all connects. And so there's a lot of opportunity for integration through multiple things that are going on. And actually this discussion about the regional plan update that Keith, the update that Keith gave leading up to this, I think is a great segue into this, because we've been talking a lot with the folks who are working on the climate resilience aspects of the plan. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to integrate what we're doing in terms of regional habitat conservation with climate adaptation. So that all started for us with this climate resilient connectivity project that we wrapped up in 2019. And I came and talked about in early 2020. It was funded by WCB and CDFW through a state wildlife grant. And for that project, we worked to take a bunch of different types of modeling, species distribution modeling, thinking about climate change, land use change. We integrated some dynamic population models so we could really think about how different linkages that we identified through our mapping and modeling might benefit different populations. So we could do some decision making, thinking about feasibility and decision criteria. And really the idea behind developing this, this research product of, I'll show you in a second, the linkage map, the regional linkage map we developed, was to be able to inform land acquisition, restoration, management with these robust models, so that not only were we thinking about what our needs are now, with one of our most pressing issues being dealing with land use change and urbanization, but also making sure that the decisions we were making now were going to set us up well for the future under climate change, where we're continuing to see increased drought, increased temperatures, increasing fire frequency that is going to change habitat and change the way that we think about conservation, or need to change the way we think about conservation and management of these landscapes to make sure that they can persist into the future, and that the work that we're doing to conserve will be beneficial down the line. So we developed this regional map that I presented back in March of 2020. This is all available online, both at SDSU's website as well as the Climate Science Alliance website. You can download data. We've got this all set up in a story map so you can explore this. I won't go into too much detail because I really want to take you from here to what we've been doing since then, but just wanted to give a reminder. And I think the great thing is that this map is already in use. CDFW is using it in some of their, and I think the Fish and Wildlife Service is involved as well in their land acquisition review committee decisions, when they need to decide about acquisitions. How well does this fit into connectivity planning for the region, in addition to all the other criteria that need to be considered for conservation in the region? The city of LA, the county of LA have contacted me about using this. We've talked with numerous NGOs. This has been integrated into the San Bernardino Regional Conservation Investment Strategy planning that's been going on over the last few years. And if you want to learn more about this, we've got a report that's available, as well as 2 published papers that came out, one in late 2020, one in early 2021. So there's lots to read about if you want to learn more. And again, the data are all available, map viewing, data download for whatever you might want to use it for. And like I said, we sort of took this, picked up and ran with it. And it was the impetus for sort of the next big thing we were doing. And when I came in March 2020 and talked about that project, I was able to introduce our Connecting Wildlands and Communities project. And really the idea behind that, it came from doing this connectivity work that I've been involved with over the last, I don't know, close to 10 years, where, we spend a lot of time talking to each other, those of us that do conservation or wildlife management or habitat management. But there's other folks involved or that need to be involved to be able to be as successful as we possibly can be. And it's really about connecting how our natural landscapes are inextricably linked with our human communities. And instead of managing them separately, how can we look for those multiple benefits in areas of common ground where we can make advancements for conservation that make both our natural landscapes and our communities more resilient to climate change. And so that was really the impetus for this project, was to sort of go beyond what we're thinking about for conservation and connect it to the way that we're planning for climate adaptation in our communities. We were really fortunate to receive funding from the California Strategic Growth Council through the California Climate Investments Program. And the idea behind this project was to address some key issues that relate both to resilience of our natural landscapes and communities in the region. So thinking about land use change, shifting wildfire frequency, and water sustainability. Those are our big issues. They come up for us no matter where you are in the landscape, we're talking about it. And whether you're talking about safeguarding our human communities or safeguarding our natural communities, those are the issues that keep coming up for us over and over again. So we really wanted to dig in on some of those issues. And I think I may have even presented this. You can click on this QR code if you want to go to the website on the Climate Science Alliance page about this project. There's lots of materials there because we're just getting close to wrapping up the project here in this coming March. But you can see here, this infographic is really sort of the heart of what we've been doing. We have these sort of 3 focal areas focused on fire, water, and biodiversity. Biodiversity has sort of morphed and grown to include climate and carbon and recreation and how we manage all that in our natural landscapes. But overarching across the top, you can really see that our intent was to work with lots of different user groups and to try and make the connections that we don't always make when we plan, within a sector or plan, within our silos, so that we could do more together. And I think we've had a lot of success, and we've had a lot of really interesting conversations by bringing together jurisdictional planners, natural resource managers, conservation planners and advocates, working with tribal partners, and really getting these different ideas coming from different disciplines and different sectors moving in the same direction. And part of this was to really make sure that this work, of course, this has been going on in San Diego for a long time, where conservation is a part of what goes on in local jurisdictional planning, but sort of expanding beyond what we normally think of as conservation to really incorporate this biodiversity, fire, water sustainability. We did a survey to really find out what did people need, what did people want. So we were not just doing research that we thought was interesting, but that really met people where they were to help advance climate adaptation. And I think the really great thing is that we heard from a lot of people that they did want new tools and data. Up to 73% of people we surveyed said that that was something that they needed in the region, that a lot of them we're already considering biodiversity, fire, and water sustainability, and more are starting to think about carbon sequestration. But that people needed funding for tools. They wanted more available data. They wanted data that was easier to use, and some support from the policy sector. So that's really where we've been focusing our energy, is to sort of provide tools, available data that's easy to use, that can be readily integrated into those planning practices for jurisdictional planners, as well as serve the needs for those working in natural resource management, conservation planning, sort of the usual suspects that, you know, in the research that I've been doing over the last few years that we typically serve. We really wanted to expand and meet that jurisdictional planning need so we could, again, sort of support this integration of planning for the natural environment and the built environment. So what have we actually been doing? Well, we've been thinking about post-fire recovery, vegetation type conversion, fire risk. We have a huge team. I'm not going to say all their names because it's going to take up a lot of time, but if you visit our website, you can see all the researchers who've been involved in this, modeling hydrologic flows, water quality, watershed risk, and how that changes under climate change, land use change. We've been doing some work with climate data, thinking about temperature and drought refugia. I did some work on recreational refugia, thinking about how do we make sure that recreational impacts are planned for in our conservation efforts so that we can allow people that connection without putting at risk the conservation targets and values that we're focused on. We've been looking at threats to connectivity. I'm working on some analysis for that right now. And then really connecting this to practice. So thinking about adaptation strategies and case studies for planners. We've been working, as I said, with local governments, conservation and land managers. Tribal climate adaptation planning is another place where we think that this work can be integrated. And we even, you know, incorporated some aspects of carbon sequestration research based on the input that we had from people. A lot of you were involved in some of the meetings. We've had lots of outreach and engagement throughout this whole project, starting at the outset to really hear what did people need and how could we best serve that, and then checking in with folks as we moved along through the process. I think a lot of you have participated in those meetings and shared your thoughts and needs, and you know, reviewed data and test drove stuff for us. And we thank each and every one of you who's participated, because without you, you know, the research can't be what it could possibly be, because we really need that feedback and the input. So we have several papers out already, and the data are intended to be, as I said, we're wrapping up this coming March, and the data will be widely and publicly available. We're working on a climate data hub that'll support climate adaptation planning by cities, counties, tribal nations. You know, we talked about how the data could support something like a fire smart growth scenario. Talked with the county a little bit about that. Strategic planning for conservation, recreation, and protecting refugia from climate change or other stressors. I'll talk about that one in a minute. And then, you know, how else can this data, you know, serve our needs, both locally, regionally, and at the state level? Well, Keith just talked about the regional plan update. You know, there's that whole nature-based climate solutions program. And I think this, as well as the regional habitat conservation, I think that's a clear integration at the regional level. We've worked with a lot of local jurisdictions as well. We are working with SCAG to the north and helping to serve the counties up there, because, you know, we may have political and jurisdictional boundaries, but ecologically there aren't any boundaries. You know, we're all connected. So making sure that we all have the same information and hopefully can be making compatible decisions and strategies about how we conserve and adapt. And I think also a lot of this information will be really informative thinking about moving forward the 30 by 30 implementation pathways, thinking about connectivity, conservation, climate adaptation, carbon sequestration. Those are all major themes that we're seeing come through the 30 by 30 initiative. I've been participating in the California Biodiversity Network meetings that's helping to inform the 30 by 30 pathways. The California Landscape Conservation Partnership used to be the LCC. We're all still working together to think about how we can best inform all the state funding that's going towards conservation and climate adaptation. So one thing I wanted to highlight out of this work is that I think is particularly relevant for this group thinking about conservation is work we've done to identify a framework for multiple domains of refugia. So, you know, typically these days when we talk about refugia, a lot of people are thinking about climate refugia. Where are areas where we could potentially escape the worst of, you know, extreme temperatures or extreme drought? But what we wanted to do is think about something that gives us an opportunity to think about not only climate, but other stressors that we face, because in this region, as I said, land use change and urbanization are some of the big, most pressing threats, but climate change is there and we need to be planning for that as well. So we came up with this idea of thinking about these domains, in other words, something like climate and wildfire and water and human activity all at once. So we can look across the landscape and say, where are areas where we think might be most resilient to these stressors or most buffered from these stressors that we can perhaps prioritize for conservation, acquisition, restoration, connectivity. And really the idea is to give us a framework for considering climate among these other stressors, where we can use existing information. It's accessible to managers for applied action, and really gives us an opportunity for comprehensive proactive planning to address multiple threats and multiple benefits. So this paper came out last year, midway through last year, and you can see sort of the images here. The idea here is that we combined each and every one of these single domains, so climate, fire, water, and recreation, into sort of this grouped refugial value, multiple refugial value across the landscape. And the idea here is if you have high refugial capacity, so down here on refugial value on the bottom and on the right-hand side would be high. If you have high refugial value across every one of your domains, so 1, 2, 3, 4, it could be anything, but in this case, we focused on the ones that were most relevant for Southern California, then you might have what we called super refugia, areas that would really help buffer from all the different kinds of stressors that we're concerned about. And that might be, you prioritize acquisition in this block A that's in the darkest green that denotes super refugia. Or maybe it's mixed and it's high for water and fire, but it has low refugial capacity for climate and recreation, but that might still be a value. So you think about how you could manage or mitigate the fact that there's not refugial capacity for climate or recreation in this block B, and so on and so forth. So we kind of developed this framework and ran it through for our landscape. And ultimately what we came up with is sort of this map of super refugia across the landscape. And very excitingly, you can see San Diego has some really large blocks of super refugia that have the opportunity to buffer from some of these stressors. And I think what we see here is this overlaid with our climate-wise linkages, the ones that we created in the Climate Resilient Connectivity Project. So we have some areas that are already conserved with the sliced crosshatching, and then we had some stippled areas that are linkages that need to be connected. And we've already conserved a lot of these areas that provide refuge, and even more can help us if we're thinking about connectivity moving forward. What is the next step of how we fill in MSCP and connect these places? Well, this can help us perhaps with some of that prioritization, is thinking about the interface or the interaction between connectivity and refugia. So we're being climate smart about the way that we do the connectivity planning. So that was just kind of one highlight I wanted to share from that work. And then I also just wanted to talk about how we've taken this CWC project, the Connecting Wildlands and Communities project, and it's sort of evolved into, it's had all these offshoots. And 3 things I wanted to highlight were some of the work we've done on carbon valuation, a project we're doing with tribal communities on resilient restoration, and then the montane forest conservation strategy that we're working on with the US Forest Service and the Southwest Adaptation Science Center. So, so I don't forget, I can't remember if it's on every, no, it is on every slide. I'll go ahead and skip right to the next project. So as I mentioned in the Connecting Wildlands and Communities project, we were hearing from folks that they wanted to know more about carbon sequestration, in particular in chaparral vegetation. It's something the state has not done very well in the past. They said it's all the same shrublands, grasslands, it's rangelands. So it's going to go over here. And then we said, that's not okay. they heard that. And so they did call it out separately in some of the updated planning, but then they said, it's complicated. So we're not going to set targets for it. But that's not an acceptable answer either, because that is the dominant land cover in the southern third to half of the state. So we worked with UC Davis and the US Forest Service. Let me go ahead and jump to the next slide here, to try and get some better answers about what does carbon sequestration and storage look like in our chaparral landscapes. And so this very complicated graphic that you see here is the work that a postdoc was doing with the Forest Service and UC Davis, and with some of the support from the Connecting Wildlands and Communities project, trying to fill in the answers to, what are these different carbon pools? How do they vary over time? How do they change after fire and recover? what do we potentially lose? What is potentially protected underground? And how does this vary across the landscape? So thinking about different populations of resprouters versus reseeders. How does this change with geography and with climate? Because we have a lot of variability in this region. So that work is almost wrapped up. It should be available, I think, early this year. And I'll be sure to share that if folks are interested. But we were contacted by the San Diego Foundation saying, they heard about that we were trying to expand on this carbon work, and they wanted to know more for the San Diego region. And so provided some funding to our group at IEMM to think more broadly about what are the vegetation categories in our region. And so what we did was a state of the science assessment. So we didn't generate any new science. What we did was we compiled all the existing literature. We had the research going on chaparral and coastal sage scrub from UC Davis and Forest Service collaborators. But what we wanted to do was fill in all these different categories and make sure that it was regionally relevant. So if something's being done at the state level, that doesn't necessarily, they use land fire as their vegetation mapping. Well, that shows that a lot of our coastal sage scrub and chaparral is grass. Well, that doesn't have the same sequestration value. So what we did is we took the Sandag vegetation data and we looked at those categories and broke them into some large categories and then tried to split them apart based on what we were able to find in the literature based on ecological differences in carbon storage and sequestration, and just our ability to separate those things. And then we also talked through with a number of you, again, participated in this, what does that actually look like? So we have to be able to quantify it, but then how do we actually put together projects where we can, again, benefit climate adaptation while thinking about doing work to advance conservation in the region? And that was really the impetus behind this. How do we connect those pieces? Because we have a lot of natural landscapes where we have value for carbon sequestration. We have to be able to quantify it, and then we have to sort of put the pieces together to be able to implement projects. So we talked with folks about what their goals were, what you wanted to be able to do, how we could actually facilitate doing some of those. What would the structure or framework for that even look like? Obviously, a lot of this work is going on in other places in the county as well. So we were talking with those folks working on the county decarbonization framework, the nature-based climate solutions at Sandag. City of San Diego is updating some of their inventory work. The San Diego River Conservancy has funded canyon lands to do some research. So lots of different pieces going on. Terra Count is being adapted by Sandag. Lots of different pieces going on. And so we think that this state of the science assessment can help inform providing a baseline of information about how we can do this quantification, and then also what people have expressed as their needs or desires for being able to put together some carbon sequestration projects in our natural landscapes. And really the thing we heard, in case anyone's interested, that people are most excited about moving forward sooner rather than later are restoration projects to enhance carbon sequestration. So I think there's some clear connections of places where we can advance some of that work moving forward in the near future. And that will help meet, decarbonization and carbon reduction goals across the region. So the next project I wanted to hit on that has sort of spun out of the Connecting Wildlands and Communities is our Resilient Restoration Project. So that's about advancing ecological, cultural, and community resilience with tribal nations in Southern California. We've been working with tribal communities for a number of years on climate adaptation issues. And actually the whole idea behind Connecting Wildlands and Communities came from talking with tribal partners about how they're concerned about fire risk and water sustainability. When you live on groundwater and you're out in the backcountry where fire risk is exceptionally high, those are things that people are worried about every day, and rightfully so. So not only thinking about climate adaptation, but our tribal partners were saying that they're concerned about resilience and adaptation of cultural values. And so for our tribal partners, a lot of species that we think about for conservation or management actually have cultural value as food sources, as for ceremonial practices, for basket weaving, that sort of thing. And so we worked together, the Climate Science Alliance, IEMM, got together with UC Riverside and put together a proposal, again, funded by the California Strategic Growth Council, to really try and advance the integration of Western science and indigenous knowledge and science, to think about how our partners could steward landscapes and stored some of these species to make them more resilient to climate change so that they would be around in perpetuity, to be able to participate in these cultural practices that are so important to their way of life. The Climate Science Alliance's Tribal Working Group is at the center of this. They're advising, driving this, and San Diego State's providing scientific support and sort of translational support, moving some of the science into adaptation planning and thinking about projects and actions up here. We're also supporting some education and outreach. Our focus is we're doing some of the work on genetic analysis. I'll show you that in a minute. And then UC Riverside is working on some ecological modeling. Familiar names, Janet Franklin and Helen Regan, who've done a lot of work with MSCP planning, who used to be at SDSU, are our partners at UC Riverside. So they're doing a lot of great modeling in support of this work. Let me jump to the next slide where I can show you. So Lluvia Flores Renteria and I have been working on this genetic analysis where we've in particular focused on resilience of Southern California oaks. We have a wide suite of culturally important plant species that we're focusing on that our tribal partners identified as highest priority. And as you might imagine, oaks are really important ecologically, culturally, spiritually. So that's when we're additional focus. We're training habitat modeling, population modeling, and now genetic modeling to really get a fuller picture of what strains of oak, where do they come from, what genetic background do they have that might make certain lineages more robust to climate change, in particular drought. So we collected acorns from a number of different tribal communities. We've been growing them in the greenhouse. I'll show you the picture of that, so exciting. They started with just little acorns and then look at the bottom, they're huge. We brought them into the greenhouse so we could do some watering experiments and really take a look at what would be most resilient to climate change, thinking about the oaks in particular. But the goal out of this work is to support, developing a pathway for restoration projects, seed sourcing and that sort of thing that will help make sure that restoration projects are as successful as possible in the future for our tribal partners. And I think there's a lot of value potentially for what we're talking about, in particular, a resilient restoration guide. What species are most resilient? What places do they need to be planted? What areas are at greatest risk? Or what species are at greatest risk? And how can we think about using restoration to, again, help those species persist? Okay, and then the final spinoff has been the Southern California Montane Forest Project. So as you heard me talking about the Connecting Wildlands and Communities project, you probably heard a lot about chaparral and shrublands, and it's because, that's a lot of our focus, because it's a lot of our landscape, but, we can't forget about our forests. They have the opposite problem of what we have in our chaparral systems, in that they don't have enough fire. We have too much in the front country, in our valleys and foothills, and it's risk vegetation type conversion in chaparral. But in our mountains, we see stand densification, and that can result in insect attacks, stand replacing wildfire, other issues like that have put our forests at risk. I mean, we see this playing out in the Sierra Nevada. The only difference is that I think we're the point of the spear. We're warmer, we're drier, and we have less capacity to manage our forests because mills are farther, and we don't have people. We don't have as many foresters who do this work. I mean, it's just harder to get the work done. So we've been working with the U.S. Forest Service and the Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center to develop a plan. How do we do more? How do we do better to make these forests resilient in the face of climate change? So where are we talking about? Well, it's mostly high elevation forests above 3,600 feet. It's hardwood and coniferous. In the past, some folks have only focused on coniferous, but with gold-spotted oak borer, we need to be worrying about our hardwood forests as well. So this is kind of the footprint of what we're focusing on. Now you'll see the national forest boundaries for reference, but I think the great thing about this strategy is that we are working together, and part of why San Diego State and the Climate Science Alliance were brought in was to make this an all land strategy, to bring in all partners who manage forests, who are involved in decision making, who have an interest in making sure that our forests persist, including our tribal partners whose ancestral territories were in these mountains, and making sure that everyone has a voice in trying to protect these places and make them resilient to change in the future. So one cool thing about the work that we're doing is that we brought back that whole refugial capacity idea, the domains of refugia, and we're actually expanding it and using it to help guide the conservation strategy. So kind of what we're doing again, to sort of create a framework for how we develop the strategy with a goal of retaining and building resilience in our region's forests. We were working to evaluate refugial capacity. Now we're defining that slightly differently, obviously, for our montane forests than we did for our lower elevation chaparral communities. And then we're going to work to identify priority areas and then identify vulnerabilities. And then for anyone who's sort of familiar with any climate adaptation frameworks, we're thinking about response strategies that are kind of aligned with climate adaptation planning and strategies. So it's been called different things. RAD is one framework. I like resist, accommodate, transform. But we're also accepting that in some places there's a lot to be done. There's a lot at risk and things are moving quickly. So we recognize that in some places we may not be able to take action in time. So being able to prioritize what we're doing and where, I think is a key part of this, and another key part that we're facilitating. Some of you may have seen a survey that I sent out from SDSU. We're surveying practitioners. What are the feasibility issues? What's realistic that we can actually get done? Because again, we have a capacity issue here because we're not logging land. So, being able to thin our forests and protect them is something that's going to take a while to spin up. And we need some help to figure out how to get there. So we're working really closely with practitioners, again, across all landscapes. So, this project is fairly new. We're about a year in. We have at least another year or so to go. You'll be hearing from me, encouraging people to participate in community meetings and ask for your input. Again, I know I'm always bugging people to please tell us what you think, but we care and it matters. Our goal is to provide science-based guidance on threats and desired conditions, integrate those practitioner perspectives on barriers to implementation that I just mentioned, come up with some goals and strategies that help us mitigate those threats and vulnerabilities. Again, this is an all lands approach because while the U.S. Forest Service manages the majority, it's not all of it by any means, and lots of other folks have interest in what we do on those landscapes and how. And I think the great thing is that there's a lot of opportunity to develop partnerships, and a lot of people are coming to the table because they do want to develop those partnerships. That's been a theme throughout the work that we do, is to support that partnership development. And so I think at the outcome of this strategy is to hopefully help support the development of some joint projects to enhance forest health and resilience. And there's already a few underway in the Santa Ana watershed, and I think somewhere else on the Angeles National Forest, but I think there's lots more opportunity to do more of that and really support partner and stakeholder engagement. So those are kind of, I think, some of the main spinoffs, but I would be remiss if I didn't come back to wildlife for a moment, because that is certainly where my heart is and how I came to all of this from the get-go. So I did just want to highlight that all this climate adaptation stuff is not forgetting where I came from. We still have a lot of ongoing applied wildlife research. We just finished up, I think I've talked a little bit about this in some other meetings, maybe SDMMP or the land managers meeting, but mule deer population estimation, disease ecology, habitat use, mortality. We just finished that project. There's a report available, one published paper, one that's accepted, 2 in review. So we've been busy. There's a lot of forthcoming information about mule deer if you're interested. And I will say almost all of these projects are in collaboration with California Department of Fish and Wildlife. We're just starting a new project on peninsular bighorn sheep population modeling to update the recovery plan for that species, really improving our understanding of the role of predation, primarily by mountain lions, as you see in the picture here, that was eating one of our collared deer, to improve our understanding of the role of predation in a multi-prey system where deer and sheep overlap. The project that will not die is feral pigs, unfortunately. We got one of the ones in the upper San Diego River at the end of the year, thanks to Wildlife Services. But as some of you may have heard, there's rumors of pigs in the San Luis Rey River. We're working to track that down and hopefully take care of that rapidly. But pigs are not as easy to manage as one would hope. I've been leading that monitoring since 2014. We'll continue to do so until we can feel more confident that we've really taken care of pigs. And then, of course, I will never forget my favorite bobcats. We have some ongoing bobcat research. We're currently working on some robust modeling of population density and habitat use along an urban gradient using some of the data I collected back in, I think, 2010 through 2012. So there's always more coming, and excited to answer any questions or talk to you, any of you, about any of the projects I ran through. That's not all of it, but I think that's the Courtney said, what do you want the title to be? And I said, all the things. So I think that was as close to all the things as I could get out in a reasonable amount of time to leave enough space for Keith to do his presentation.
Well, Megan, the Institute for Ecological Monitoring and Management, and as well as the Climate Science Alliance, has certainly been busy on all of this. I know that carbon sequestration comes up in every single climate action plan, obviously. And the easy strategy seems to be, well, let's plant a whole bunch of trees. And I know we've gotten questions being land managers in our group. It's different in our urban environments, you know, the types of trees they'd plant or where they'd plant them, but for the unincorporated, I know, or for the jurisdictions that have a lot of resource lands, that they're looking at those areas and saying, hey, let's go plant a whole bunch of trees out there. All I see is a bunch of grass or something. And so is there any thought to working with some of these climate action planning groups to where they could focus their efforts and maybe give them some guidance on this?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually did a review of existing climate action plans, and by and large, the nature-based strategies that were included were often about urban tree planting. And a lot of times, you know, that's not even, I wouldn't even really call that sort of conservation or ecologically minded, because a lot of times it's ornamentals or non-natives or that kind of thing. So I definitely think there's a lot of room, and that's something we identified as a potential next step, is starting to work to I think the San Diego Foundation was talking about setting up a conversation with folks working on some of these climate action plans at local jurisdictions with some of the natural resource managers. One of the things I heard a lot when trying to connect people to really hear where folks were and what they needed was that in the natural resource community, we know that this is coming, but no one really knows how to get started. And I think the first thing that needs to happen is we establish that pathway. How can we start talking together where we can envision these projects that not only work towards carbon sequestration, but meet conservation goals and are ecologically sound? And so I think that's a next step. And by having some of the quantification that we set up, I think that helps us, you know, start to identify where we can take steps that will help us move in the right direction.
Okay, well, when I get those questions, I'll know who to call, right? Okay, we have some hands up. I don't know who was first. I wasn't looking at that, but Trish?
I think Michael was first.
Oh, okay, well, go ahead and go.
I keep going first. Go ahead, Trish.
Well, thank you, Megan, for your presentation, all the great work you're doing. I'm wondering if your carbon sequestration study recommended, since your work largely entailed literature review, to look at available sources and data on the value or the ability of chaparral and oak woodlands to sequester carbon, if you called for more direct research into those ecosystems and their ability to sequester carbon, because we don't really know very much.
Yeah, absolutely. No, for every, I encourage folks to check out the report. We just finished it at the end of 2021, so I'm sure no one has seen it. I think it should be live now on the Climate Science Alliance webpage. I just sent it to them the other day. But we call out research needs for every vegetation category. They vary slightly depending on where we are at the moment in terms of our knowledge base and where we are in terms of research. But absolutely, chaparral, oak woodlands need information. We need a lot more information on below ground storage and dynamics. I think one of the cool things about the work that the UC Davis and Forest Service team has been doing is that it's remote sensing based, so it would make it really easy to update, but it does need field validation. They're working on getting some funding to do that field validation now. And you know, I included data that they gave me that was just focused on the above ground component because they hadn't completed the below ground component. So once they finish that at the beginning of this year, we'll need to update that information as well. But yeah, there's a bunch of research needs. I mean, it's why I call it sort of a state of the science assessment, is where are we now, but what else do we need to be able to move forward?
Okay, Michael.
Okay, likewise, Megan, this is really great, important and timely stuff you're working on. It's really, really cutting edge of what's being discussed. And now we have some substantive information and data. That first map you showed us of the regional wildlife, the connectivity map. The first subset was focal species linkages, but it doesn't indicate whether those are conserved or just identified as for focal species.
Yeah, so here, hold on, let me, I'll pull it up again so I can actually show you. I didn't go through it because I had done it in March and I didn't want to take up too much time, but I will, let's see.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yep. So we developed, we had is it 5 focal species? It's been long enough and I do enough things that now I forget what I did. We had 5 focal species and we did mapping based on that. We actually, so long story short, what we did was an ensemble of different modeling approaches. So we did some focal based species modeling. We chose species that utilize different habitats, move in different ways, have different behaviors. We also did some species agnostic modeling, looking at just landscape features that might facilitate movement. And then we also integrated some mapping of areas that didn't show up in our models because our models aren't great at working in urban areas. So places like the Emerald Necklace Vision Plan for the LA Basin area that utilizes existing riparian areas and identifies those for connectivity. We just integrated those. So the difference here that you see between the light green and the dark green is that both of those were primarily identified through focal species modeling, but what we call focal species linkages are areas that the majority of which are not conserved, whereas the areas in dark green are components of large conserved units. So if you look at, for example, the protected areas database, those would be identified as being parts of large conserved landscape blocks. So the way I would describe those are areas that are already conserved that are important for connectivity. And we wanted to include them so that we could think about management strategy. They're already protected, so we don't have to worry about acquisition, but we should be thinking about management strategies to maintain and enhance connectivity. Whereas the light green areas, the focal species linkages are areas that there might be some conserved lands in there, but we need to be focusing on making the connections so that we can connect those large blocks with the smaller ones.
Okay, and is it possible to zoom in on these maps?
Not on the one I'm showing you, but yes, I can provide a link to the story map. It's a interactive web map where you can zoom around till your heart's content.
Okay, another couple questions real quickly.
Sure.
I can't remember what your breakout of the priority areas, which have overlapping kind of regional outcomes with regard to fire and so on. That whole set of maps and data should really be going to local jurisdictions as well, I would think, land use planning departments and so
Yep.
on. That would be really important. And then my final question is, has anybody done a species specific or at least genus specific study on climate change and oaks?
Oh, there have been some climate related studies on oaks. We're focusing on coast live oak and Engelmann oak. Engelmann oak, I think, certainly has not had as much focus because it has a narrower distribution, but I don't think that we even know as much about coast live oak as we would like. I think there are some other species where perhaps there's been a bit more, but I'm not sure how equivalent those would be in terms of drawing parallels for management or potential responses.
There's been a lot of work. Blue oaks have had a lot. Blue oaks have had a lot of work, but
yeah.
not.
Yeah, and then just anecdotally, just FYI to everybody, we've got an oak grove at Crest Ridge, but many of our properties have oaks, and they really do suffer during severe drought, but they're very responsive to supplemental watering if that's available. I don't know how kind of the science world looks at that, but certainly keeping a tree alive, that helps. But what is really interesting is these oaks, Crestridge in particular, are expanding their footprint. I mean, it's kind of a shock in the face of climate change, but they are spreading beyond their boundaries that they've been kind of locked into for a number of years. So that's just an observation. But thanks for the work, Megan, really, really great.
Yeah, absolutely. Just in quick response to your comment about making sure local jurisdictions have all the data we're talking about, part of our survey was, how do you do your planning practice? How can we integrate the information to make it as accessible to you as possible? So we're in the data portals that we're working on, we're being responsive to what we heard back.
Right.
Okay, Candace, did you have a question for Megan?
Yeah, sure. It's really more of a comment. So Megan, very timely, because I was actually just reading your report right before this.
Okay. Oh, you just muted yourself, Candace.
You think I know how to do this after 3 years. Anyhow, super timely. Thank you for that. And it brought to light so much of the different connection points too, because I had no idea you were doing all this kind of like offshoot research as well in conjunction with the research that we funded. This is less of a question and I think more of a plug for the convening that we will be having. The carbon conversation is a big one that we're having, and we are we're funding research, and we have been looking at both nature-based solutions and other opportunities for carbon projects. And so we're actually having a convening, I think, either in a month or two. So anyone that wants to join, we want to get as many voices in there as possible. So I couldn't think of a better group than this one to pitch that to. So anyone who wants to join, let me know. That's being headed up by our Director of Environmental Initiatives, Christiana De Benedict, who worked at USD, who some of you might all know. And so anyway, please do either shoot me a message here or just let me know via email.
Yeah, a lot of more conversations to have to move things forward there. You're muted, Leanne.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions from the group?
I think we need to kind of get going, so we give Keith his
Okay.
time.
Well, let me just see. I don't see any hands up from the other attendees as well.
No, I don't see any more hands.
Okay, well, thank you always, Megan, for joining us. Next, we have item number 6. Dr. Akif Escalin and Shannon Collin Lynch from UC Davis. I apologize if I mispronounced your names. They'll be talking about the results of the recently completed SANDAG project on best management and monitoring practices for the invasive shot hole borers in San Diego County. So go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. I would like to thank Kim and Courtney for inviting me, giving me an opportunity to share some of the information that we have gathered from this awesome project that you guys funded. So first of all, Shannon Lynch, who was the big part of this project, who has run the most of this project, was going to be with me originally. At this point, she is traveling for a job interview. So I'm gonna be presenting her part as well. So today I'm going to talk to you about the invasive shot hole borer, Fusarium dieback. As you all may know or have heard about it, it is an invasive shot hole borer that we are dealing with more than one species of the ambrosia beetle, which are associated with their specific pathogenic fungi. So they are carrying these fungi intentionally in their mouth part, which is a mycangia, and then they distribute from one tree to another tree. The goal of them is that they are fungus farming beetles. Their goal is just to provide food. Of course, these fungi are pathogenic more than one species in California. So they are basically, we have Polyphagus and Crochet shot hole borer. In San Diego County, we have mostly Crochet shot hole borer, So in terms of the damage and also their susceptible host list are the more or the less, you consider them kind of like the cousins from the same family. They are actually related to the T-shuttle borer, which is another ambrosia beetle that has been shown causing problem in East Coast, especially in Florida and Georgia states. So when you look at these pictures, you can have an idea. So these beetles have wide host range, and each host responds differently to the beetle attack. So as you can see from the starting from the maple to the oaks, they all are susceptible for this invasive pest. They are originally from Southeast Asia. So I'm going to give you a little bit more information about it. We have also been there, look at their constitution in that, their origin of the location as well. So our objective with this project was to determine the distribution of the beetle, especially in the areas that we are concerned about, the Bell's Vireo and Southwest Willow flycatcher habitat. Basically, mainly in San Luis Rey River area. So we also wanted to predict the predictive model development as a part of our project that I'm going to talk to you. We also evaluated the preventative and curative control options for different habitats. As part of the projects, we also did the training of the land manager as we learn and get information from this project as well. So part of the trapping with the beetle monitoring in this area is that we usually use the sticky traps. You can also use funnel traps as well. The main key here is that they're using the quercevorol, which is an attractant of the beetle in the area. Based on these kinds of the trapping, as you can see in this picture, we set up more than 40 traps in 1 or 2 miles the distance from each other, from ocean side to the Lake Henshaw area, because we wanted to know where the beetle infestations are, and then if it's going to be heading into the Cleveland National Forest, and that goes the sensitive habitat areas as well. So we don't only look at the trapping monitoring in this area, we also establish a permanent monitoring plots to get into the beetle infestation level as well. We have been monitoring this area based on the trapping since 2017. By the time when we start looking into the beetle, the most of the western part of the San Luis Rey were infested. All these blue lines are the one that was found positive. All the yellow lines or circles are negative in that area. In 2017 and 2018, we start seeing the movement to the Gomez Creek and Cactus Road. Those are the movements within a year that they came in. So 2019 and 20, we were interrupted by the COVID-19 restrictions, and we still were able to get some data, and then we found out that the beetle was able to move until the Pomo Valley region in that area. From that on, they didn't move. We didn't see any positive the finding. So based on our predictive model link that we did, so we are actually not expecting to have the beetle movement in this area that much based on the host composition and also their climatic preference in that area, which I'm going to talk to you about. As I mentioned you that the problem with this beetle complex has the broader host range. They have more than 77 tree species that are reproductive host competent, that we call them. 20 of them are the native tree species, which is very common, the habitat in Southern California. avocado is another host that they can produce in that area. Keep in your mind that California is the big avocado producer. Almost 90% of the United States avocado production happens in California. So when you look at all over these susceptible host species, we have up to 60% of the trees, including urban trees, are susceptible or the potential to be a reproductive host. When I say it's reproductive host, that means beetle can colonize and then they can produce their offsprings. So therefore, their population can increase in that infested area. Okay. So in our previous work shown that the host species are important epidemiologically, and also they have a phylogenetic structure. So generally speaking, that the close related plants are most likely to share pests and pathogens. That's why I'm showing you these cartoons to have a better understanding. For example, these orange circles that you can see has the close related species that are the one that's most likely to share the pathogen and pest, and the blue line are the little bit distance related species that they have the less possibility of sharing the infection of the pest and diseases. Based on these modeling, so we established a number of the permanent plots in Southern California, look into where the avocado orchards are infested and non-infested, and where the native vegetations are, which is close to each other, next to each other, when you look at in Southern California landscape. Based on these information, we set up a network of the monitoring plots. It's up to 260 in Southern California. 83 of them were in San Diego County, as you can see in this picture. So in each plots, which was 50 meter by 50 meter, we look into the host composition, microclimate data, disease severity or number of the beetle attack, and we have been monitoring this one since 2017. I'm not going to go through into how we calculate it, and then so we have this information in our report. So we estimated the size susceptibility based on the interaction between the phylogenetic structure and host abundance in that area. So by calculating the probability of each species in local communities in each host. So this is the phylogenetic tree that shows all the susceptible hosts that has been found in not only California, in other invaded areas as well. As you can see here is that using the phylogenetic distance between the confirmed and host trees are weighted the probability of the host abundance in each species. From our logistic regression, we have the probability of the infested and observed infested areas. Based on these information, these are the infested areas, these are the non-infested areas. When we put this possibility of the prediction model, so as you can see here, so this is the 100% infested areas. The model has been working through. This is the areas that is the less probability that we didn't see the more infestation in this area. There were some exceptions based on their microclimate data. So when we look at the day degree model, in heavily infested and non-infested areas, temperature was different. So this is the temperature minimum, maximum, and the optimum temperature, as you can see, from heavily infested and non-infested area. Optimum temperature for the beetle reproduction in heavily infested areas are optimum, but when it comes to non-infested areas were low. So these non-infested areas were not suitable for the beetle reproduction more than 1 a year. So this gives us an idea that why the reason that some location in Southern California, even though we have the beetle, but even though we have the susceptible host, they may or they may not be successfully established in that area. So based on the community structure, number of the beetle based on the temperature, or also based on the susceptible host, is differ and increase. So this is the conditions were not suitable 1 generation of the beetle within a year. This is the 2nd generation, and this is the 3rd generation. As we get the 3rd generation, that possibilities is decreasing in that area. Take-home message from these prediction models is that the warmer conditions is the good condition for the more beetle generations. Therefore, they are causing the more problem in that area. So these are the map that shows the infested, non-infested, and look the areas in 2017, 2018, and 2020. In 2018, the number of the plots that we have been looking for, only 3 of them. And 2020, that increased a few more. So the beetle movement was not too fast because of the temperature suitability. Based on the prediction model that we suggest or recommend that focusing the monitoring resources in the non-infested location is highly the possibility of the being infested based on the model, which I'm going to show you in this map. In this were the locations of the permanent the monitoring plots. Each pie showed the 1st year, 2nd year, and non-infested areas. When you look at the possibilities, which is these are the percentage of the possibility of the being infested. In this area, percentage of the infestation is in this area is very low, in this area is very high. We should look into the continue monitoring this area and apply when you have the inverse infestation, remove the heavily infested plants to reduce the population of the beetle in this area. When you look at the Cleveland National Forest area, possibilities of the infestation is very low based on the host composition and also temperature, microclimate area. So there is not much a problem that we are expecting to have in this Cleveland National Forest area. All this information that could be found in our report, and we will be happy to give you more information about that. So now we are getting into the statewide prediction model, that including some of the landscape information as well. As part of our projects, we also were looking for how we can control these pest and disease complex. The problem with this pest and disease is that you are not dealing with one organism, but also more than one organisms, one beetle and one disease. And then keep in your mind that they are ambrosia beetle, they live within the plants, which is very difficult to get into some of the materials into to control them with the chemical applications, which I'm going to talk to you. So when we first start working in this project is that we found some of the infested areas, we found some of the suitable hosts are not infested at all. So that gives an idea that maybe these hosts are, even though they are the same species, maybe having some endophytic microorganisms that they are preventing them to be infested in that area. Based on that information, we did the endophyte sampling from different the species in Southern California, including willows, cottonwoods, oaks, and sycamore. We had the certain number of the location of sampling. We had thousands of the samples. From those samples, we tried to isolate those beneficial endophytic microorganisms. Once we isolated them, we wanted to see if we put them in the same media with the pathogens, which is the fusarium, if they are going to interact. It shows that some of those endophytic beneficial microbial organisms are able to inhibit the growth of the pathogens in the media. So based on this information, we selected certain number of the beneficial microorganisms. If I have to give you an example, like the similar kind of like the gut microbiome of the plants. We also wanted to see if these beneficial microorganisms, not only the fungi that are associated with the beetle, but also other wood canker pathogens. In the past, we have seen canker diseases on Escondido Creek, willow dieback, to protect it. It looks like those beneficial endophytes also inhibit the growth of those the other pathogens as well. Based on this information, we isolated a number of the different, not only bacteria, but also fungal species that are present within the healthy-looking plants in Southern California. So we are about to publish this, the paper information. The question was that's good. We identified those beneficial microbiomes within the plant, and then how we are going to introduce this into the living plants. So we originally planted to do this one in the nurseries in Southern California, in San Diego area, but because of the COVID restrictions, we had to do in the greenhouse on the campus. The way that we did is that we introduced we fermented those beneficial bacteria that we gathered from the native plants. We introduced them onto the cuttings of the willows, cottonwoods, and sycamores under the pressure, vacuum infiltration, to have those beneficial diffuse into the cuttings that could be utilized, and then we plant them on already. When we look at after we introduce them, we challenge them with the pathogen to see if the pathogen introduced into the plant, those beneficial microorganisms will protect those the plants from those pathogens. Based on the results on the sycamore in here, we found out that the pathogen is not able to move as fast as the one on the control. That means all the beneficial microorganisms within the tissues are preventing the movement of those the bad guys. We also wanted to see, when we introduced those the beneficial microorganisms within the plant, if they are able to stay within the tissues. And then we took the tissue samples from the artificially inoculated wood pieces, and then we found out that those wood pieces contains the living beneficial organisms in this picture that you can see. So that means the pathogen, the beneficial microorganisms are able to stay alive and populate within the plant tissue. As we speak, we are trying to introduce those beneficials by soil injection or soil inoculation, and also injection into the plants. The question was, when you look at this kind of research that has been done in the past, most of them stays in the laboratory level because it's very difficult to ferment them in a large scale. We have been collaborating with a group of the researchers from the University of Cheonnam in South Korea. They have been doing similar project on different beneficial microorganisms, and they have been using some of the media where they can mass produce or ferment these microorganisms that can be applied in large scale. Right now, we are working on them and then to able to produce these beneficial microorganisms in the large scale that could be applied. Beyond that beneficial microorganism, we also did the field pesticide trial just to make sure that we are not missing any of the control options. We did the pesticide injection trial on the wood instead of applying in the soil, because these are the pesticides that could contaminate the soil. We just wanted to see if they are going to be able to protect these plant materials from that. So in order to do that, we use the plants, certain number of the plants in the Orange County parks that we could evaluate these pesticides. We use more than 10 different injectable pesticides. Some of them were beneficial microorganisms. And we use lightly infested, moderately infested, and heavily infested locations. When we look at the heavily infested locations, none of our pesticides were able to protect the plants. They were too late because their xylem vessels were compromised by not only beetle, but also their pathogens. They were not able to move. But when we look at the moderately and lightly infested, they were able to have some sort of the protection, but not 100%. So these are, this part of the paper is published already. And so we are at this point not recommending this application of any pesticide in the native vegetation. That's why we were working on the biocontrol agents that could be applied, especially on the restoration projects, as well as the maybe some areas that could be managed in native vegetation. We also wanted to make sure that we are doing the bioassay to see if any of those pesticides could move through the plant and then to the fruit or leaves of the plant that is being probably consumed by the native habitat, native life. And we found out that these pesticides are not very well moved, not more than 3 feet when from the location of that's being injected. So there is nothing that needs to be worried about it when they are applied injection. So this is the part of our fungicide retention assay. So the one above the 3 feet that doesn't have any fungicide that affect anymore. So as you can see, the fungus is colonizing on the wood pieces that was taken from those pesticide injected plants. We also look at some of the repellent chemicals, including verbenone, in collaboration with Dr. Richard Statheimer from UC Riverside. Verbenone seems to be having some effectiveness, but you have to make a Christmas tree out of the one tree to be able to protect that each tree. So it is not suitable. We use both pouch form and also paste form. But if you have a kind of like the historical tree that you would like to protect it from the tree, and you can use the verbenone pouches that are available commercially. We also look into natural enemies, parasitoids. Again, we made several trips to Vietnam and Taiwan last several years to look into the natural enemies. We found a wasp is able to colonize and then lay their egg in the head of the beetle where they are native to, and then they just produce their offsprings within the beetle. So right now, as we speak, Statheimer group has been working in this one to see if they can produce the offsprings, and also it's a little bit long process to make sure that these predators are not causing any damage to our native beneficial beetles, which I don't think we have it beneficial beetle. But anyway, so all this research has been done in the quarantine facility at UC Riverside, and then it's being going on. We also look into entomopathogenic fungi, which are the fungi that can colonize and kill the beetle. We work with the two different entomopathogenic fungi. Bulgaria bassiana is the one of them. Some of the studies show that in East Coast, especially in Florida, some of those entomopathogenic fungi are working very well to control some of these beetles. So when we look at these studies in vitro in the laboratory, so they seems to be working very well. But when we put them in the field outside, because California climate is too dry for these entomopathogenic fungi, so they just cannot stay alive. We even had the part of the project with the USDA researchers that we mix these entomopathogenic fungi with a protein-based foam that we spray on the plants, and then this foam is the one that you spray, and then it doesn't stay on the plant more than 20 minutes. Don't worry about this. This is not the way that you are going to paint out all the plants. Anyway, we didn't get enough encouraging results from these entomopathogenic fungal application as well. We also look into the defense activator. There are some chemicals that, including salicylic acid, could be activating the defense mechanism of these plants to protect them from the especially beneficial these harmful pathogenic pathogens. So again, we did the trial on willow trees, and then we didn't find any encouraging results. So that is we got the results from the 2 years, and then we are looking into the third year results from that. So since 2015, we have been organizing the field and indoor workshop with help of Courtney and Kim. They have been awesome for organizing these meetings. Shannon and I just show up and then show land managers what we have found, what we observed in the field in that area. From this project, we were able to produce several handouts and the useful information, information, decision-making, the chart that can be found in our website. I'm sure some of them are in the SANDAG website as well. So please feel free to reach out any of those in our lab website. With that, I would like to thank all the collaborators and as well as all the funding sources, especially SANDAG, for this information.
Well, thank you very much for that update. Some of those treatments look promising. It still looks like we have a ways to go, though, before we have a real good handle on that. Does anybody have a burning question? Because we are a few minutes over time. So I don't see any hands up.
No, I don't either. And Leanne, I'll also make sure that we either provide or a link to those handouts when we send out some of these materials to the working group, and also to Akif's report.
Great. Well, I want to thank everybody for participating today. The next working group meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, March 8th at 1 p.m. Same time, same channel. The meeting is adjourned, 3:06. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and everybody be safe out there.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Akif.
Thank you, Armin.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, Akif. That was great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Pinch hitting for Colleen's as well.